I'm Simon Lambert from This Is Money, and I'm joined now for a special interview by Greg Jackson, the CEO and founder of Octopus Energy. He's a man who knows more about energy bills and energy prices and the future of energy than most people in this country. He's going to talk us through where we're at now on energy bills, what he sees the future of home energy as being, how he thinks we could get bills down for people in the long term, and where we could possibly be in a decade's time. Greg, welcome to This Is Money. First of all, I think the thing that everybody wants to know is, where are we at with energy bills at the moment, other than the fact that most people would have hoped that they would have come down more by now?
Well, first of all, hello, Simon, and indeed, hello to your listeners. Thank you for having me. But energy bills are too high. I guess I should very quickly say, thanks to the energy price cap, which essentially caps supplier profits, that's not anymore because of high price from suppliers. It's because our energy system is too expensive. The price of gas is still around about 50%. The wholesale price of gas is about 50% higher than it was before the energy crisis. That's actually a lot better, because at one point, the wholesale price of gas was, I think, 15 times higher. So it's come down a lot. It's not yet back to normal levels. Now, that doesn't just mean that gas is more expensive, but because of the way the electricity wholesale market works, the price there is set by gas 98% of the time or something. So high gas prices then set high electricity prices. But I think there are some other issues underneath it that could be addressed by, for example, the government. So far this year, our country has spent something like £800 million paying wind farms to turn off on windy days, and then paying gas generators to fill the gaps. Because the way that the wholesale electricity market works, these wind farms get told what they're going to get paid, and they get paid it even if there's not enough grid to ship the electricity to where you want. That's crazy. We're just paying for nothing. Now, that's the kind of thing that if the government addressed that, we could start to see bills coming down further. We're also spending a lot of money doing things like upgrading the electricity networks, all of which goes on bills. In the long run, it might bring bills down, but the companies that run the networks are paid based on how much they spend. So if they spend more, they earn more. And instead, we could change this system so that they got incentivized to spend less, and that would bring bills down. I just give a couple of examples here, because fundamentally, our high energy bills are partly driven by high gas costs and partly driven by high system costs. There's not a lot the UK can do about gas costs, that's set globally. There's a lot we can do about the system.
Now, with this thing that you mentioned there, where the electricity price is set by the gas price, it's the sort of highest price marginal production of a unit, isn't it? It's like what it would cost to generate that one extra unit that we need. Why is it that we can't just change that? If we're producing so much cheaper electricity elsewhere, why are we using that to set the price of electricity still, when everybody knows it's a problem?
Yeah, so what you're describing there is that every half hour, the electricity system operator, partly government really, runs an auction. Every electricity generator in Great Britain submits their price. And like any auction, they sort it by price, starting at the cheapest, getting to the most expensive. But the most expensive unit that we buy in that auction sets the price that everybody gets paid. So you might have a wind generator, who's got very cheap electricity because they don't have to pay for any fuel costs themselves. Their fuel, wind, is free. And they might be bidding a price of £50 per megawatt hour. Somewhere else, a gas generator might be bidding £150, and the wind generator gets the 150, not the 50 they bid. And so that means that there's kind of an awful lot of the time, cheap generators are getting paid expensive prices because of that auction. Now, that auction is set by government policy. It's been around for decades. It didn't used to matter, because when all of our electricity was coming from coal and gas, they all had to pay the same input price, basically. So the auction price was very, very similar to everyone's costs. But now that we've got this very wide range of different kinds of electricity generation, we don't get the benefit of the cheapest. Now, our company proposed reforms that would have helped address this. The government chose not to do it because I think a lot of the existing generators, the system works very well for them. They lobbied very hard against it. But it does need policy change to stand up to the big generators who, some of them make very large margins. There's no price cap in their world. And to stand up to them and start to address these problems.
Because we're actually quite good at renewable energy in the UK, aren't we? On a sort of comparison to the rest of the world.
Yeah, look, we definitely were. So the UK has got just about the highest proportion of offshore wind in the world. But other countries, Spain, for example, has more renewable energy than us. Brazil has more renewable. Sweden and Norway, and they have cheaper prices. They don't just have cheaper prices because of the amount of renewable, but also because of the way they run their systems. But increasingly, the way the UK runs it means that we don't get the benefit of this renewable. In fact, sometimes it works against us, like this thing about paying wind farms to turn off on windy days. So I think that what's happened is the UK sort of moved early, like we've done in so many industries. Like, the jet engine was invented here, but other countries ended up making all the money out of it. We did a lot in the early days of renewables, but we haven't then grasped the nettle to reform our markets so that consumers get the benefit of that. Instead, sometimes it actually goes the other way, it's making things more expensive. We need to change the market.
And is energy storage one of the keys to this? Is that one of our big problems, is that we can generate lots of cheap energy, but we can't store it. And so it ends up, as you say, going to waste, wind farms being told to turn off, that kind of thing.
Storage is one answer. In fact, the UK's got a lot of grid scale batteries, 10 times more than Spain, for example. But that's, it's expensive. First of all, what we should do is just on windy days, give people in the areas where these wind farms are cheap electricity. If we can't ship it around the country, at least use it there and bring the cost down for them. Ironically, Scotland generates 3 times more electricity than it can use, but it pays the highest prices. That's how broken things are. Storage is getting cheaper all the time. Grid scale batteries are getting cheaper. We will need more and they'll be very useful. But first of all, let's just make electricity cheaper. Particularly, by the way, because that would also mean the electricity we put in the batteries is cheaper when we store it. We've just got to fix that broken market.
There's this great irony that we're being told that we need to save more energy, not use as much energy, at the same time as we're rushing headlong into technology that uses vast amounts more energy in terms of artificial intelligence, data centers and so on. The government has decided that data centers are a good thing and we want data centers in the UK. Would that encourage more data centers to set up if they knew that they could go to one of those locations close to the wind farms, Scotland, for example, the northeast or whatever, and they would know that, okay, yes, they're not always going to get cheap energy, but on those days when there's too much, if they're close by, they would get cheap energy.
Yeah, that's what we've seen in other countries. TikTok has set up its biggest AI data center in a very rural bit of Norway. They've done that because it's cheap electricity in that region, because the Norwegian electricity system makes it cheap if you're near the source. So you would see more investment in the industries of the future, but also, by the way, existing heavy industries would often be able to benefit from cheap electricity as well. So it would be good for the economy.
Obviously, we're talking there about energy on a grand scale, on a national scale, but Octopus deals with energy on a domestic scale more than any other company in the UK now. How has Octopus gone from being a challenger energy company to the UK's biggest domestic supplier?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we look after customers. Of course, every company says that, but the proof's in the pudding. I think we've won the Which recommended, the toughest test of service, I think, 8 years in a row. But, we also come top of Ofgem's, the regulators' own surveys of customer satisfaction by a long, long way. In fact, I think we're the only company that's above average. You'll see the same in the U-Switch Awards and almost every ranking. And that's because fundamentally we thought that too often in a sector like this, people end up phoning a company and having to press so many buttons to get through to someone who then won't help them. And we realized that, if you're spending the kind of money you do on electricity and gas, you deserve better service. So that was number one. I think number two was that we've got this broken energy market that we can continue to hunt around to try to find ways to save people money. So, we've got 1.5 million customers who've signed up for programs where they get cheap electricity on windy and sunny days, or when the grid is tight, we'll pay them literally pay them to use less energy. And so finding lots of ways at least to try and help people get a bit more value from energy. And then I think we're the only big energy companies always charge less than the price cap on the variable rate. So even if you don't want to do any of the special schemes, there's still money to be saved. And so I think that combination of value and service has been the secret.
And with those special schemes, these are the things like your agile tariffs. Is there a situation where you look at it and you go, okay, well, if you just want to do the straightforward, get some energy from someone, pay the price that you're told you're going to pay, you take the standard tariff, that's fine. But you're not going to get the best deal on your energy bills. You're not going to save money on your energy bills. Do people have to be willing to say, okay, do you know what? I will get a smart meter. I will do something a bit different and sign up to one of these agile tariffs. I will try to kind of, to use a horrible phrase, like lean into this kind of future of energy rather than just going, well, I just want my bills to be exactly the same as they've always been.
But I think it's a bit like supermarkets. There's some people who will always shop for bargains and will change what they're going to buy to get a bargain. There's others who will always buy what they normally buy, but if it's on offer, they'll load up on it. And there's others who don't look at the offers at all. And all of those are entirely fine. And it's the job of a company like us to give you great value however you want to do it. So the first thing I said is like just trying to have our standard price below the price cap. So if you don't do anything, it's a bit cheaper. But then fixed tariffs are often cheaper than the variable deals on the price cap. And so I think our company has more customers on a fixed tariff than any other, certainly any other big one, because we make it really clear and easy for people to see that just lock in your price for a year and we'll typically be able to save you money. And sometimes quite a lot, a couple £100 a year sometimes. I think then if you want to go further, we've got the kind of things you're talking about. Now, the agile tariff, for example, is a tariff that changes every half hour. You don't need to check your app though. It's just helpful to know that electricity is typically quite expensive between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. Very, very cheap overnight and cheap on sunny afternoons. As long as you know that, you can use a little bit more at the cheaper times and a bit less at the expensive times. You'll save money. Only maybe, 100,000 of our customers are on tariffs like that. Millions and millions on the more straightforward stuff. But even if you're on a straightforward tariff, you can then get programs you sign up to where we'll give you a text message or a notification in the app on a windy day or a sunny day and let you know that electricity is going to be cheap at those times. I think the point really is there's lots of ways to save money you don't need to think about. But if you do want to think about it, you can go further. And this, it's not complicated. It's a lot simpler than a supermarket, but it's the same kind of idea. And, sometimes people do say to me, no one should have to think about their energy. And I'm like, you don't have to. But a bit like with food, if you go to a supermarket and there's food that's reduced to clear, it's great that some people get a bargain and we reduce waste. And we can do the same in energy.
Now, there are some people who do really like to think about it though, aren't there?
I spend time on forums seeing customers chatting about it. And it's like my grandparents used to drive hours and hours to find the very cheapest petrol. They and their friends would all swap notes on what was going on at Morrison's or Asda's. And I think in the same way, a lot of people then start swapping notes on just how to save money. And I think that's great. If you're the kind of person who wants to do that, that is fantastic because you get a bargain, but you also make the system more efficient. You're reducing waste. You're using this very valuable resource better.
Feeding into that is the kind of the increase in the number of people getting solar panels, for example. I mean, solar panels has definitely gone from something that was an early adopter niche thing, quite some years ago. I mean, my father-in-law signed up to solar panels in the early days when you got the really good inflation-linked feed-in tariff rates. And he had to pay quite a lot for the panels, obviously, because they were expensive in those days. But I can't remember what he said to me. He said he's worked it out and he reckons that the yield he's getting on them now is something like 12, 14% or something. They paid for themselves a long time ago. The deals aren't quite so good anymore because the government realised they probably needed to stop paying people that amount of money, but also because they've become more mainstream. More people are willing to sign up for them. And then also you've got the rise of electric cars. Are you seeing that? Are you seeing a change in the type of people who are getting solar panels and then deciding maybe to go down the route of battery storage or combining with an electric car and signing up for those tariffs that you're talking about?
Well, yeah, I think actually you mentioned there battery storage. And I think battery storage has been the game changer for solar panels in the UK, because obviously solar panels generate when it's sunny, but we use a lot of electricity in the evenings. If you've got a battery, it fills up from the solar panel during the day when it's sunny, and then can use the power in the evening when you need it. More than that, most people with solar panels end up generating more electricity than they can use, at least at some times. These days, you now get paid for the electricity you put back onto the grid from your solar panels. So if you don't use yourself, it doesn't get wasted, it earns you money. And if you've got a battery, we can put that electricity back onto the grid in the evenings when electricity is very expensive. And so you earn a lot more for it. And it's really the combination of battery and solar panel that has really created this new boom in UK solar. And you asked, like, what kind of people get it? And I think a lot of people buy it outright. If you've got some savings, can be a good use of the money to reduce your bills going forward and increase the value of your home. And to reduce the risk of volatile bills in future, you've now got a lot more control. I think there's also, some people buy it on finance and it kind of pays for itself. But once you've paid off the finance, you've essentially got a house that can save 90% on its electricity bills. It looks like for a lot of people, it's a very good investment. What I see most is that the people who get it are the ones whose neighbors have got it. Because what you find is once one house has got it and they've kind of discovered the benefits, then their neighbors pop round, ask the questions, and they go and get it as well. So you'll see streets with no solar panels, and then you'll see streets with 5 houses, 10 houses, because as soon as your neighbors have got it, you discover it could be good for you too.
Actually, this is really quite good effect that kicks in, which definitely has a more powerful effect than the government tells you to do something effect.
I sometimes drop in on our installers when they're installing things in people's homes, and you can literally see it, like, what the scaffolding's up, the guys on the roof putting the solar panels, and the neighbors pop around to start asking questions while you're there. It's quite interesting. You did ask about, once people start getting these, you talk about solar and battery, and the other things people get, like an electric car or electric heating with a heat pump, because once you're generating your own electricity, like, electric cars are already super cheap to charge at home. I think if you use a special tariff for electric cars, it can be 5 or 6 times cheaper per mile than a petrol car. And given that electric cars are now, some of them are roughly the same price as their petrol equivalent, some are cheaper. And in the second-hand market, electric cars can be, I think, 80% of it's super cheap anyway. But if you're generating solar electricity, you can get to a world where you're basically not paying for driving.
And that is something that actually can save people a substantial amount of money. And you're right, the prices of electric cars have come down by a huge amount to close to parity with new cars. And with second-hand cars, some of the get quite cheap electric, run around nowadays, which is something that just was not the case, 5 years ago. You were paying a premium and you couldn't get that many kind of cheaper second-hand cars unless they were very old generation ones. But you mentioned the heat pumps there. That definitely, I think, falls into the category of government telling people to do something and not having the desired effect. And there's definitely been a bit of a backlash against heat pumps, I think, from our readers. But then, you speak to people who've got them and they say, look, this is great. This is saving me a fortune. What is the benefits of a heat pump, and how much work do people then have to do elsewhere in terms of sorting out their heating and all those other things?
Well, I agree with you, by the way, that the way that governments seem to try and force things on people, and then, the language of ripping out gas boilers, stuff like that, really does cause, I get it. We all get this kind of reaction that says, you're going to tell me what to do. And the reality with heat pumps is they're a relatively new technology to the UK, very common in the rest of the world. I was just with some people from Canada. They're in an area of Canada where 60% of houses are heated by heat pumps, even though their temperatures in winter go down to -30. So, heat pumps can work extremely well in all climates. It's just taken a while to study. The UK's housing was all built, well, some of it was built initially to be heated by coal, and then all of the more recent housing built to be heated by gas. And so it's taken a while to adapt heat pumps to work really well with UK houses. But now that's happening. I think surveys show that 85% of people who've got a heat pump prefer it to their old gas boiler. And they prefer it typically because, first of all, it can save money. As long as, again, you have an appropriate heat pump tariff for electricity, it can be £200 or £300 a year cheaper to run than a gas boiler and more reliable. If you look at a gas boiler, it's got a lot of complex parts. We've got, risks of dangerous fumes that sometimes you've got to have carbon monoxide monitors. The gas boilers are often not as reliable as we think, that people pay a lot for their gas boiler, cover their insurance. Heat pumps are just so much simpler. So once they're installed, what customers tell us is their homes are more comfortable, they're cheaper to heat, and the heating's more reliable. I mean, every winter you get to this bit where people turn up in the office saying that they're late in because the gas boiler was on the blink. It's like, it happens so much, got a phrase for it, which meant they had no hot water, couldn't have a shower, all that stuff. So I think we've got to recognise that gas boilers have done a good job, but increasingly there are better solutions around. They're not yet ready for everyone, but where heat pumps are good for you, you can save money. And again, government policy hasn't helped. Some of the old incentive schemes kind of encourage people to put heat pumps into houses that you couldn't even heat properly with gas. So of course you got some dissatisfied customers. And some of the installers back then weren't good enough. But where you are now is the satisfaction rates on heat pumps are great. And I've seen exactly the same curve with electric vehicles, which was like, 10 years ago, electric cars were expensive, definitely not right for everyone. But it took time to start getting the cost down and really make them attractive to a lot of households, which I was at a kid's birthday party. There's the 1-year-old there. So it's just adults standing around talking, really. And I was talking to the grandparents, and they were just telling me about the electric car they'd got. They're not environmentalists. They got it because it was cheaper. And they were talking about, I think they spent like £8 charging it in the last year because they hunt around for free charging when they're shopping and things like that. And, you've got a world now where electric cars can suit a lot of normal people. And heat pumps are heading that way. They're just not as far down the road yet. But if heat pump's right for your house, and typical 3-4 bed semi often is going to be right, it's already a great solution.
Whose houses wouldn't it be right for, on the kind of flip side?
One interesting thing in sectors like this is so many policymakers, opinion formers, live in big, expensive mansions that don't have much insulation and are hundreds of years old and are drafty. Some of those are going to be harder for heat pumps today. Heat pumps can do it, they're just going to be expensive and complicated. It's also worth noting that 20% of homes in the UK don't have gas. So there's a whole bunch of ways in which heat pumps can be good for people where they can't even have gas today. They're good for people who've got kind of fairly typical UK homes, but they're more challenging than if you live in a stately home.
I grew up in a house that wasn't connected to the gas mains. There's like one of those places where weirdly there was a cul-de-sac of 14 houses built in the countryside. They weren't connected to the gas at the time when they were built, and then they looked into it. I think my parents looked into it, and they were quoted all the houses quoted some crazy price. So they all run off a combination of, my mum's got Calagas, but then some of the neighbours have got oil tanks and things like that. And actually, one of the neighbours who's done a big renovation project has put a heat pump in, because I guess in that situation, it just makes sense, because heating your home on oil or a gas tank is really expensive, isn't it?
Really expensive and inconvenient. I've got a mate who, the oil delivery just didn't turn up when it was supposed to. And there's a lot of issues like that. But I think, again, heat pumps are just improving rapidly. Our company, we actually have built our own factory to manufacture heat pumps. It's in Northern Ireland, British made, designed for Britain. And they can heat the water that goes into radiators hotter than a gas boiler. They can heat up to about 72 degrees Celsius, whereas a gas boiler is going to be typically 55, 60, 65. So modern heat pumps can actually create more heat than a typical gas boiler.
Because that has been one of the criticisms in the past, hasn't it? Or they won't heat your water high enough. And the other criticism has been the noise. Have they got quieter? I mean, I must admit, a couple of years ago, I did go on holiday to a house in France that had a heat pump, and it was in the back garden, and it was on a lot more than I thought it would be. And it did annoy me when I was sitting in the garden.
The noise comes from two things. There's a unit in it called a compressor, which essentially compresses the gases to create the heat. Compressors used to be quite noisy, but a bit like car engines. I remember when car engines were really loud, and over time the engineers would kind of get rid of that noise. They've been able to do the same on the compressors. And then the other's the fan. It's got a big fan rotating. So as long as the fan is kept clean, and maybe with occasional maintenance, like once a year or less, the fans are quiet these days as well. In my house, if I'm sitting in the kitchen, I can hear the fridge more than I can hear the heat pump. I had a customer last week, the week before, post on social media. He'd got his heat pump from Octopus, and his wife used to make him turn the heating off at night when they had a gas boiler because it was too noisy. And with the heat pump, he no longer has to turn the heating off at night. So, it's worth remembering quite a lot of gas boilers are pretty noisy too. And sometimes the heat pump actually solves that problem.
And they can be in quite inconvenient places as well. So what about, we talked about this before with people who just want the standard tariffs, but, in terms of the future of energy, what do we do about just bringing prices down, bills down long term, and also the people who don't want these things? They don't want an electric car, they don't want solar panels, they don't want a heat pump, and they don't want a tariff that changes.
Well, they definitely shouldn't have to have any of those things. These should all be people's choices where, they think it values their home, where they think it will make things cheaper, more efficient, or easier. But if you don't want to change anything, you shouldn't have to. The big things to get energy costs down now are, in particular, the energy market. The electricity market has to be reformed to squeeze out the waste that's everywhere in that market. So less than half your bill is the actual electricity. We pay so much now for all of the extra bits of the system, like gold-plated upgrades to the networks, which aren't always necessary. We've gone through this program of putting smart meters in people's homes, but half of the electricity network isn't metered. So we actually don't know how efficient. There are now technologies that can let you get a lot more out of the network without building new pylons, without building new substations. But the UK is not using many of those technologies. You see them around the world. So all of this now really sits with government and regulator to change the way that system works, and they need to do it urgently.
Are they engaging with that properly, fully? Ed Miliband is a man who is very interested in the energy market, isn't he?
I think the challenge is whenever they try and engage with it, there are companies who are making money out of the existing system that lobby hard against it. And I should say, look, the oil and gas companies have made huge margins. Our gas is still about 50% higher than it was before the crisis. And during the energy crisis, the UK government spent £100 billion or thereabouts subsidising bills and dealing with the costs of the fact that gas became so expensive. Not because the gas companies, they made huge margins, not because they'd done anything special, but because, in particular, Putin invaded Ukraine. And I think, we're still carrying quite a lot of these costs. Some of that we're not in control of. That's a global issue. But the system costs I keep talking about, that's in the government's gift, and they need to be brave and tackle those incumbent interests to get the cost down. Otherwise, it's hard to see how bills are going to come down far.
And finally, where do you see home energy in 10 years' time? What are our homes going to look like energy-wise in a decade? What's going to change?
But for a lot of people, they won't look that different. I really hope bills will come down if you see strong actions from governments. But increasingly, look, there's a sort of an irony that a lot of these technologies can almost eliminate energy bills. In fact, we work with house builders to build what we call zero bills homes. So they have solar panels, heat pump, battery, and a smart hot water heater. And we can optimize all that equipment to eliminate energy bills. There's 5,000 homes so far have been built since we introduced this program, and they're accredited and are running with zero bills. We think we could build another 100,000 of those by 2030. The more we can build cheap technologies into new homes, literally the cheaper we can make those homes to run. But also we start creating an energy system where we can make it cheaper for everybody else. And so I think if we can have as many homes as possible being cheaper through solar and battery and heat pumps as well, by the way, where appropriate, you can then make electricity cheaper for everybody. And I really hope we can see both government action, but also investment and innovation from private companies and empowering homeowners to do this. It's still too bureaucratic. If you get solar panels, you still have to fill out a load of forms and wait for approval before you can sell your solar back to the grid. That should be a same day thing. So I think there are lots of areas this can be made better, both decisions people can make for their own homes and that will add value to them, but also decisions for government and policymakers and responsibility companies like us.
And those homes that you mentioned there that are paying zero bills, are they like the kind of passive house type homes where it's all sealed and everything, or are they just normal homes that have just been fitted out with all of this stuff?
They're just normal homes and they're not expensive. I mean, some of them are social housing, affordable housing, and premium housing. It's every kind of house. It's just about the technology of solar, battery, and heat pump, and the way we can optimize that. I think another example would be we just launched a deal with BYD, the car company, and I hope there's a couple more car companies soon, where if you get a car whose battery goes both ways, so your home can use a little bit of electricity from your car's battery, we can give you 12,000 miles a year of free driving. Because again, we of course the reason you get a car is to get from A to B. It's not to have like energy storage. So the primary thing is you'll always have enough electricity in the battery to drive. But what we can do is essentially fill the battery up at the very cheapest times. When electricity is expensive on the grid, we put a little bit of that electricity back into your house or back into the grid. And with the money earned from doing that, we buy back more electricity at cheap times for more driving. It uses AI so that it will always have enough electricity for driving, but it can literally eliminate fuel costs. Combined with the fact that electric vehicles need a lot less service and maintenance. There's no oil filters to change. There's no oil to change. The brakes are essentially electric brakes, so you don't get much wear on the brake pads. All the stuff that you get done in a service is so much cheaper in an electric vehicle. So, you can see ways that all this stuff can bring down costs. But too many of us, we still remember, the way things were 5 years ago or 10 years ago, when an electric vehicle was a hugely expensive Tesla, rather than these much more affordable and very cheap to run vehicles that you now have.
Greg, thank you very much. That's all we've got time for. Thank you for joining me. Really interesting chat.